Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where tonight we'll discuss Chapter 4 of Observing the Craft by Andrew Hammer. Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com. Welcome back to the Working Tools Podcast. This evening, it's just the two of us. There's a song in there somewhere, I think, but
just the two of us. We can make it if we try. I'll stop now.
I hope so. Before I get off the worship brother Jarrod Dunham from Penticton Lodge number 147, and I am David Colbeth, Master Mason from King Solomon Lodge number 60 in Auburn, Washington. So welcome to the Working Tools Podcast here, and we were discussing offline in the glue room, we call it, that we probably are going to agree too much on this topic, and so hopefully it's worthwhile to you all.
But, I'll buck tradition, and then I'll be the contradictory one.
What? Never. So, we're at loss here without Matt, our opener, and Steve unfortunately had a family issue, and the best to him and his family. But we're missing our opener, Matt, that usually throws us a curveball or a fast pitch or something to get us started. And so we were trying to decide how to get this going. But this first section in Chapter 4, he talks about scarcity is what gives commodity its value.
Right.
And it's one of the things I underlined right in the first page. And so it's interesting. There's a lot of talk about trying to build up numbers and build up membership. We've had lots of conversations about over membership and over recruiting or not recruiting or whatever else. And so it's interesting that he makes that connection between a basic commodity. And so is Freemasonry a commodity though?
Well, everything's a commodity. Well, not to put too fine a point on it, but everything is a commodity. It's interesting, when he makes the point about university degrees. It used to, 50 years ago, before I was born, that getting a university degree was a big deal. And right. I think in my I remember my generation that the concept, just the mere hint that you wouldn't go off to university after graduating from grade 12 meant that you were some kind of weirdo and a rebel. But yeah, it's a commodity that is not for consumption by everyone. Is best, I think, something that, we could say he says.
I guess I think of a commodity in the purest form, if he has an economic element, is that it has an, I'm not going to use the right words. It has an end to it, right? There's only so much grain. There's only so much oil. There's only so much water.
That's if you believe in a scarcity mentality.
That's what he's kind of. In theory, he's kind of talking about there, right?
Well, no, he's talking about the scarceness of something gives it greater value.
Yeah. Meaning that not everybody can get some or have some or be part of
it. But not all commodities are finite.
Sure.
In your example, we can grow more wheat.
In theory, as long as you have lots of water and fertilizer and seeds, and you're right. It's all. We
can always talk about economic. I'm not going to go there because that's just going to. But yeah, he does point out that, if you make something that, I think the reason he's using the commodity thing is because if you make, because he talks about cheapening something.
Yeah.
That, there is something that is too easily gained has less value to us.
Yeah.
So,
well, as you mentioned, the university idea that honestly though, in my family, in my immediate circles, a university degree was not common. And so one of the, I honestly come from the Midwest and from a family lineage of farmers and that kind of, the Midwest, Middle East type of people. And so a lot of people didn't go to college. Some barely finished high school. And so in my immediate family, my sister technically was the first one to graduate because I stopped after a couple of years. And then some of you know me, I think I mentioned on the show before that I finally, it wasn't a midlife crisis necessarily, but it was just kind of something I had, one of them wish I would have. So I went back and got my degree. So I just finished my bachelor's degree, but it was more of a personal thing and not something I really needed to have.
Right.
But yeah, it wasn't, my dad didn't have a degree. Now he had education. He had educated himself. He was an electronics technician when you fixed things and didn't throw them away.
Right.
But he had educated himself.
And actually in Brother Hammer's defense, he does mention that he uses the university, but it's nowadays like going on and getting further education
Sure.
after graduating is more common. I just use
No, you're right though. And he does kind of, and I understand what he's saying is that it's
right
now it's very common. And he's talking about how the Romans previously also, that when it was unique or special to be a Roman and to have those, the authority, if you will, or the recognition of being a Roman citizen. And then what was the word he used? When every
when he gave it to all the barbarians at the gates.
Barbarians at the gates.
But it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, the Pax Romana was a big thing. If you were a Roman citizen, you couldn't be touched.
Yeah. And sorry to all those Tom, Dick, and Harrys, but when every Tom, Dick, and Harry can be a Roman, then who cares? Right?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I highlighted a couple of pages in where he talks about the desire to make it easy for a man to become a Mason gave a result of a fraternity that asks nothing from and then gives next to nothing to its members in the way of real philosophical instruction, but congratulates itself in how well it mimics the social functions of service organizations. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty harsh.
Yeah.
Have we gotten that? Is that what we've done?
Well, there's a lot of guys think that Masonry is that kind of community service, social organization. And it's interesting how we've talked about before that Andrew says, well, those lodges can be those lodges. Just don't expect, don't limit us from being what we want to be, but this is the way it should be.
Right.
So it's always this kind of, well, this is how it should be, but you can go do what you want.
Yeah.
Just leave us alone.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, so, I mean, it goes on and we talk about the pursuit of excellence. But as I've said before, he uses the word excellence. I say craftsmanship.
Yeah.
I mean, he does talk about craftsmanship, but it's just that concept of craftsmanship.
Yeah. I highlighted just above that part about the service organizations that he talks about that Freemasonry is not for every citizen. And there's a lot of men in Freemasonry and others that think that Freemasonry should be for everybody, and it is for everybody, and anybody and everybody should come in and be part of it. And there's a piece of me that wants to agree with that to some extent, that we should almost, maybe every man should be tried against Freemasonry, so to speak. But I also understand the idea that it's not for everybody. So I constantly wonder, would I have made it through our processes now that we have in place, 15 years ago? Because it was a little different process when I joined. It was more of always got a pulse, get them in. And would I
I guess and he mentions in this chapter about people being willing to try and fail. That he mentions, that people are willing. It's search for people who are willing to apply to a lodge, knowing that they may not get accepted.
Yeah,
and I think it's that humility that probably is what. I mean, I've only known you for a while. I think you probably would have gotten in. I think, well, no, because you willing to do the work.
Yeah.
Like not looking for the quick fix. Because I know you've mentioned quite a few times on the podcast what you were sort of looking for and what you assumed Freemasonry was going to be like, and when it wasn't as difficult as you thought it was going to be, you were a little confused.
Yes, I was a little bit because I didn't know what to expect. There's some guys that do lunch research and try and figure out what it's all about, or they're searching.
Right.
And he talks about that. I think it might be a little bit later, and I don't want to necessarily jump ahead too far, but he does talk about how a man should be seeking out these things and seeking out higher ideas and all that. And I don't know that I was. Maybe I was indirectly, and I do believe in obviously a spiritual connection, or whatever you want to call it, some kind of connection. So maybe I was being drawn to that, but I don't know that I was. And I think I'll freely admit, and I have admitted, that when I first joined, I wasn't necessarily looking for these deeper meanings. I think in the last 5 years or so, or maybe 8 years, is when I've become more observant.
Right.
At the beginning, I was like, and maybe it was just this, I had an expectation, it wasn't there, and so I just adapted to what was the result. And it was our lodge was a lot more social, and is still. We're pretty social, but it was a lot more social lodge oriented, and so I just kind of adapted. I guess it was just another organization, and I had been in Lions and been in VFW and all these other organizations. They're just organizations,
right?
So I just adapted. I'm glad we found more.
Well, and that's the thing, is that,
yeah.
But
And he continues to talk about that, if right after you're talking about that social service organizations, that if we don't, in his opinion, if we don't alter what we're doing, that inevitably will become social rather than singular enterprise.
Right.
And that I suppose part of me thinks that there'll be, if Masonry wasn't to have a resurgence and have folks look at the observant side of things and or the esoteric side of things, that I suppose we could slough off into a social club, like I don't know, piss off all the elks and slough off into some other group that is more just social and not philosophical. But part of me thinks that there's always going to be that difference. I don't think we're always going to just be one or the other. And I think there'll be some, we talked about it before, there's going to be some medium, right? Some middle ground. There'll be some that are much more philosophical and thought-provoking and esoteric, and others that are maybe more social. And I just was chatting with a friend he's a senior warden, and he's thinking about his going into the East next year. And he was asking about dress. And I said, well, that's the next chapter, but
yeah.
So I sent him the 8 steps, and on the website, Andrew has the 8 steps to excellence and then also the 8 questions, and they're not quite the same. They're just a little bit different. So I sent those to him, and so I said, well, it's really up to you how you want to present that, how you want the lodge to grow. And he said, well, are they progressive? Should we do these 8 things in order, or all at once, or are they whatever? I said, well, they're individual elements. They're not necessarily progressive, but I would think it would be really hard for a lodge to try and do all 8 all at once. I said, I think you'd be really lucky to just focus on one each year. And in 10 years, if a lodge did that, and if every lodge did that, in 10 years, we'd have some pretty dang good lodges.
Yeah, I think there's some that you might be able to piggyback onto.
Sure.
But yeah, I think the thing is, I mean, change doesn't happen overnight.
No.
And trying to change everything overnight is just asking for a headache.
Yes.
Because as we said, like, the name of this chapter is the pursuit of excellence.
Yeah.
Not the attainment. As a famous line I remember hearing about, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. No one guaranteed you were going to find it.
And to your point earlier, you said that maybe I was seeking it. And he says, any man that's unwilling to learn and produce good work should not be allowed to enter or remain in the craft. Is there some idea that people that aren't willing to work and produce should be banned somehow? That's a pretty rough idea.
Well,
or is it do they self eject, I guess? The word that comes.
Well, I mean, it depends on the expectations of the rest of the lodge, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're not willing to put in, like, what's the point of joining something if you're not willing to put in any effort?
Amen.
you know, I mean, and yeah, and I think it all boils down to people assuming that, you know, once you've gone through your third degree, you know everything, and you know you're just going to be enlightened, and it doesn't work that way.
So we're just doing good works. That's not enough.
Just doing good works.
Yeah.
Well, no.
So long as what we're doing is good, it must obviously be that what we define as good. Therefore, the overall effort expended towards generous good is what makes us better men. That's what that must be what masonry is all about. I realize.
Right.
So yeah,
but no, it's not, because I mean, think about it. I mean, and this is always my argument, is that I can go out, I can do good works. I don't have to be a Freemason to do that. And as he says in the chapter, it's kind of expected that, like, all humanity is kind of expected to do that.
I think that, yeah.
And
I think that's really what I agree 100%. And
yeah,
we've argued, we've talked around the idea, but we just agree on this whole chapter. And then I underlined the next section, just exactly what you said. Masonry calls us to excellence.
Yeah.
Expect that. So I wrote on the sideline, expect excellence.
Yeah. And it's about, and as he says, it's about developing the person, not like it's about me becoming a better person, so that by my becoming a better person, I make the world around me better.
Right.
It's not about me going out into the world to make it better. It starts inside and works its way out.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's the point I get, and like that comes across to me is the fact that, you know, if we pursuing excellence in the lodge, you get in the habit of pursuing excellence elsewhere.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you expect people, the new members, to come in, and you give them that expectation that, yes, it's going to be work. Yes, you have to memorize this, you know.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't feel that you want to or could do this, it's not a slight on you. This isn't for you.
Yeah. And
we need to accept that, because just having more numbers isn't going to, it's going to keep Freemasonry going, but not necessarily what we want Freemasonry to be going.
Yeah. And like you just said, he talks about the pursuit of excellence in every aspect of our life. It's a continual effort for self-development and lifelong learning. It's not just something like, oh, I W you, Freemason, you are an excellent person.
Yeah. Well done, old chap. Here's your ring.
And in every aspect of your life and your human interaction, in your dress, your behavior, your mannerisms, and in sharing food. And so as I was trying to point out to my friend, he was asking him too about, does a master's hat always have to be black? And I said, well, he said, is a master's hat custom, a tradition, or is a master's hat tradition? And I said, your tradition, question mark, my tradition, question mark, your lodge, question mark, my lodge, question mark, Freemasonry, question mark. I said,
right.
Now, whose tradition are you talking about? And so then I said, well, if you think about dress, what's your best dress? You know, what, and you know, so I think you have to decide what that means to you. I mean, to me, and I wanted to be Socratic and ask him questions, but if he hears this podcast, in my opinion, and I think Andrew's opinion, the highest dress you could do is a tuxedo. And so you just get a tux and wear it all the time. And I think a top hat, in my opinion,
right,
is the best dress you can have. And I've always taught in sales too, if you're just dressed just a little better than your client, which in our case, the master should be the best dressed, and then the lodge members will probably not do as well, but they'll dress a little better, hopefully.
Right.
And so, but I don't care. I mean, I'm not going to say, oh, you have to wear a tux. We talked about it before. I think that, in my opinion, for years I wore a black double-breasted coat or a suit with a bow tie, and nobody knew, and shiny shoes, and nobody knew it wasn't a tux, really. And then eventually, when I got, okay, this thing is serious, I'm going to stay here, I got some tux pants, so I had the fancy stripe on my pants. But it's just about trying to step up and just be a little better, I think.
Right.
And we're, as you said, we're living tools. We are the tools that hopefully shape the stones, the perfect stones of our life, right?
Right.
Rough ashlar and perfect ashlar.
Yeah.
And he even talks about that what is the ultimate standard of dress in the Western society? It's most likely tuxedo. You want to excel at that if possible.
Right.
Or green.
He talks about, excel, his precision in his ritual and the traditional celebratory, like talk about foreshadowing.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's not about, Freemasonry is not about good enough.
Why?
Well, because it's not good enough. No, okay, so if we're talking about the pursuit of excellence, then they're contradictory terms. Good enough is passable. But we don't, if we want passable, why would you, we can do passable on our own. If we want to push ourselves, it's good. You talk about joining Freemasonry to improve yourself, to go from good enough to better than you were before.
Mm-hmm.
So when we don't want to settle.
Yeah.
And I think, and he has I don't know if I underlined it, but he has a line in here where he talks about what I've always said was the worst thing to happen to Freemasonry. It was the growth after World War II.
Yeah. Well, and he does say it's not for everybody.
No,
it should never be offered as such. And again, that kind of, I underlined it, but I also, there's a part of me that thinks, I guess it's my savior complex. I want to save everybody. I want everybody to be part of it, right?
Right. Oh, there he is. When he's talking about the downward adjustment of our members from an unexpected and unintended boom that would never have been possible to sustain in the schools of the ancient mysteries.
Yeah.
So, when you let, and that's the thing, is that he talks about in this chapter about if everyone brings in everything, and where's that section talking about bringing in?
Yeah, the 10. I was just
people, things that they like doesn't make it Freemasonry.
Are you talking about the one where he's talking about he selects 10 exceptional men and?
Oh yeah, he says, you gotta, what did you put into it? Men have been allowed to bring anything they enjoy from their daily lives into the craft and call it Masonry.
Yeah.
I'm like, no. It kind of goes along the lines of some of the affinity lodges that I've seen.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, no, I mean, yes, it's nice to have a group of guys that get together that, support a certain football team or have a certain hobby, but Freemasonry, you can do that you don't need to bring that into Freemasonry. You can do that outside of, you can have a bunch of Masons who are really into one football team, but they don't have to form a lodge for it.
Yeah. Well, and he talks about too, that having too many numbers, if you take 10 men and train them exceptionally versus trying to train 1,000 men,
right,
your message is going to be lost
amongst
them. But those 10, then once you teach them to be masters, then they can then go teach 10,
right,
the Breck commercial and so on and so on.
Yeah, you tell two friends and well, but it's true.
Yes,
and you get better quality from that,
and the fullness of the knowledge will be transferred. That's right. That's what I really appreciate about it. I don't know if we have time, probably, maybe, but the next section he talks about that, are we willing to reverse this direction of initiatory theories and seeking out new members? I wrote in there, is society not seeking? I wonder if we become a society that's no longer seeking in general, and so we think our numbers are dwindling. I think I wrote somewhere else later. Oh yeah, on the next page. I'd be curious to know what the population. You probably already have this knowledge. In the 18th century, the Masonry was increasing. The numbers of Masons were increasing, but what was the population ratio to those numbers of Masons? And then we had a decline before World War II, and then, as you said, World War II increased, but so did population exploded.
Right.
And then we saw a drop off. And in theory, we're less Masons now than we were in the 18th century. Right. But what's the population ratio?
Well, our population hasn't dropped off. I mean, as we said, we're heading towards 7 billion, more than 7. I forget what. I don't even know how many people we have now in the world. I just know that it's going up consistently. I mean, I know our population booms. There are population explosions because of things like the Industrial Revolution, and once we found things like penicillin, and realize that if you wash your hands after a surgery, you won't kill the next guy you work on. So I mean, our population has always been growing.
Yeah,
it's taken wars, but yeah, I think our percentage as our membership as a percentage of the population is definitely diminishing.
And so if I don't know, let's just say it was 20% of the population, just to throw a number out there, back in the 18th century, and now it's only
0.5%.
0.5%. The awareness of Freemasonry is, in my opinion, likely much less among the population, and so is society. Is the society seeking, and are they able to find what they're seeking? I guess is what I'm getting at too. Is that I don't know that I didn't know anything about Freemasonry until it happened to my great uncle, and so. I stood outside the Masonic Lodge as a high schooler and didn't know anything about Demolay, didn't know anything about Masonry. And so does society even know to seek? And so I know that's maybe that's a intro to that. We could talk about that in our next segment.
I think that's actually an excellent, because I definitely have an opinion.
Well, I guess you all have to stay tuned and listen to this next segment. We'll start off by talking about, is society seeking what we're after, or what we have. And well, thank you for listening to the Working Tools podcast. I'm David Colbeth, and on behalf of Jarrod and Dunham and myself, thank you for listening, and have a great day.